An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.
Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? Somebody give me a shout out in the comments just to make sure that you can hear me. I'm always paranoid that I'm talking to no one. So if you give me a shout out in the comments, that will be great. Get my tongue working here in a minute. So, welcome to my Wednesday night stream, Geeking Out About Comics, where I talk about making comics and appreciating comics. I guess we can do both at the same time because I do want to talk about how comics are made, and that will help people, especially me and others, learn how to make comics the traditional way, the way that, they used to make comics, good comics. Great. People can hear me in the comments. Great. I'm going to put up some Crom the Destroyer art in the background just for a few minutes here and while I talk. And what I like to do with these live streams is I'm going to talk as if it was basically one of my normal videos. I'll probably go on for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, maybe a little more, and talk about comics and then go back and answer any of the questions in the comments. So let me know if you have a question, put a question mark after it, or tag me in it and I will get to it. And hopefully every question will be answered. So just a little update on Crom the Destroyer. We're now 15, no, I think it's 14, depending on where you are in the world, 14 or 13 days out until we hit the end of the campaign for Crom the Destroyer. So if you haven't picked up your copy of Crom the Destroyer, you should head on over and take a look and see. There are 11 pages that you can read there on the Indiegogo page of the 66-page book. The link for it is in the description, by the way, as well as the link for the Valiant Heroes, which is where you can get both the Valiant Heroes and Thomas Valiant, my first graphic novel, if you're looking for those. So all of that is happening right away. And at the same time, I'm also shipping out right now the books for the Second Chance campaign for Thomas Valiant. So those are shipped out. Some of them, about half of them were shipped out yesterday. I think there's about maybe 10 or 12 left, which there might be some extra printing things that need to be done. So they'll take a little bit longer. So just a little update on that. So tonight, I want to talk about panel economy, not just panel layout, but panel economy. And trust me, I had a hard time stopping myself from making one of my normal videos talking about this because I just found it so exciting to talk about and think about. And what I'm going to do here after Crom the Destroyer and the art for Crom the Destroyer finishes, I'm going to show you some Neal Adams panel layouts in the background. I have a little slideshow for those, although I'm not going to talk about any specific one. I'm going to talk about Neal Adams. I'm going to talk about a little bit about Will Eisner, a little bit about Barry Windsor Smith and John Buscema, and a whole bunch of things that have to do with the panel layout. And a good place to start, since we're looking at Crom the Destroyer here, is the fact that you had the first copies of Marvel's run of Conan done by Barry Windsor Smith. I think it's like 30, I think it's around 30 issues, maybe not quite that many, that Barry Windsor Smith did for Conan originally. If you know the number, just put it in the comments because I don't remember off the top of my head. But after he finished his run, then they got John Buscema, and he basically stayed on the book until almost the end. So for the entire run, for years and years, until the last couple of years, he went off of the book. Now, here's an interesting tidbit. Now, this might be apocryphal, not entirely sure, but the interesting tidbit is the fact that it's supposed to be Marvel wanted John Buscema to start Conan from issue 1 on, but they just couldn't afford John Buscema to do that. And so they got Barry Windsor Smith. So the thing is that why couldn't they afford to get John Buscema? Well, it's because he was doing at least 2 other books for Marvel at the time. And Barry Windsor Smith was only doing, I think, occasional 10-page stories in one of the horror magazines for Marvel at the time. So he wasn't doing much, even though he was not the greatest artist at the time, nor was he the fastest, I would say. He certainly couldn't do more than 1 book at a time, but he was a new artist. He was cheaper than John Buscema, and they could push him up to the 22 pages that Conan would have within the original books. So point being is, well, first of all, if you look at early Barry Windsor Smith stuff in Conan, he looks like, well, he is a bad clone of Jack Kirby. And you can see he does a lot of cheats. You can see where there's sometimes somebody's arms over their face while they're talking, which you don't usually do. Why would he do that? He's doing that because he didn't get the face right, or he's trying to cheat so he doesn't have to draw the face, all these kinds of things, right? A lot of things like that you can see in the early Barry Windsor Smith stuff. And then he gets better and better with every issue. But anyway, point being, you got John Buscema, came on to Conan after a little while. Now, how did they get John Buscema to move over to Conan? Well, first of all, the thing is that John Buscema, as I said, was working on at least 2 other books at the time. I would say most probably, this is just me, that they had evidence that Conan for the Marvel run was actually going to make money, so they could put John Buscema on it and actually pay him his rate. But at the same time, John Buscema notes that he had to reduce his detail in his art and also reduce the number of panels that he put into each page, which is extremely important. If you look at early John Buscema runs, the early John Buscema run, I guess, because it would probably be like 50 issues or more, where he's playing around with a 6-panel grid. Now, I did an entire video about this probably about 6 months ago. It has the Conan the Barbarian basically sitting with a sword and a shield, if you're looking for the thumbnail of it in my other videos. But the point being, John Buscema went down to a 6-panel grid. He stopped putting in so many panels so that he could work faster, so that he could actually fit in Conan the Barbarian with the other books that he was doing for Marvel at the same time. So what's the point of me talking about all of this? Where does this go into panel economy and panel layout? Well, here, that's the thing. John Buscema had to simplify his style so that he used 6 panels per page on average. On average, of course, because there are some pages he uses more, some pages he uses less, like the splash page at page 1, things like that. And this is what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, maybe more than a month ago, about the fact that on average, I would say, if you have a traditional good run of Marvel comics or just American comics in the 80s, not so much in the 90s, but I would say in the 80s, that would be the high point. You're looking at 6 panels per page is the average. For me, for my books, I try to make it somewhere between 6 and 9. You can push it up to 12 if you really need to, and you also can bring it down to 1 if you want to do a splash page. But I try to keep it average 6 to 9, closer to 6 than 9, but sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Now, the point for having 6 panels per page, why would John Buscema pick 6 panels per page? Now, he wanted to simplify his style so that he could actually do the book in the allotted time that he had, but at the same time, he's someone he was teaching art at that same time. And he taught art for a very long time in one of the New York schools. I can't remember which off the top of my head. But the thing is that he knew how to work with sequential art. He knew how to sell a comic. He'd been working for Marvel for quite some time. He was one of their big draws. So I would say, and again, this is probably just apocryphal, but John Buscema was looking at it as, how do I not cheat the reader? How do I give the reader enough panels per page so that he doesn't feel cheated with the story, that I'm giving him less story? And he chose 6 panels per page on average, which again, I would go with his experience and say, yeah, if you want to start making comics, especially if you're a new artist, then go with 6 panels per page. Try at the very least as an average of 6 panels per page, because this is what John Buscema did to try to actually get the work done on time. Now I'm gonna, as I said, put up a slideshow of Neal Adams panels so you can look at those while I talk, because I will be getting into the Neal Adams stuff in a minute. But again, I would take John Buscema's 6 panel page and as his statement that this is what you do if you need to get it done and you only have a limited amount of time, or if you're someone who's starting out in comics, a limited amount of resources to tell your story. You got to get it done. You can't. Well, let me put it this way: you're not starting out being Steranko. You're just not. Okay, you can't put 20 panels per page. You just can't, and get the stupid book out on time. I've looked at Steranko's stuff. All right, he can put 20 or more panels per page, but again, you got to remember what Steranko was doing. If he was doing the Nick Fury stuff, that was mostly for half a book, so around 10 to 11 pages. That was it that he was doing per month. And when he moved over to Captain America, he didn't last very long. Why are there so few Steranko comics? Because he didn't last very long in comics. And I would say part of that was probably because he was so detailed in his art, he just couldn't keep up. So again, go with the John Buscema way of looking at it. 6 panels, start there, and then move upward and downward from there in order to actually figure out how much more you can put in, and you economize how many panels per page. Now, this is where we get into the Neal Adams stuff. Okay, you're looking in the background. Oh, by the way, I meant to say, if you're looking at the background, this is fairly early Neal Adams stuff. Not the earliest, but we're looking at where he's getting to be, a really big draw for Marvel and DC. Can you see the influence that he had on Frank Miller? Because again, I told that story in a video a couple of weeks ago and on my live stream last week, that Frank Miller originally went to Neal Adams and said, I want to work in comics. And he said, no, this is all wrong. And then he traced over it, says, this is how you do it. And Miller says in that interview that I covered that he went home with those pages of Neal Adams art under his arm, like they were what he said, not, what do you call it? The Rosetta Stone for drawing comics, right? This is how you draw comics. And this is how he learned how to draw comics. And he kept on going back week after week to Neal Adams until he was good enough, taking all Neal Adams pointers. But anyways, you can really see when you're looking at these pages in the back that I'm showing right now, how much this is an influence on early Frank Miller, especially his Daredevil run, especially the use of shadow and light, everything. He's a copy of Neal Adams. But anyway, the point being, if we also look at that, well, I also wanted to mention, again, how do you not cheat your reader from putting too less of a story on the page than they paid for? Again, go with John Buscema, I would say, and use 6 panels per page per average page. But at the same time, go back to the statement I'm always talking about from Will Eisner, saying that you can only have one exchange per panel. Now, again, there are exceptions to this rule. Especially, I'm looking at Will Eisner stuff, and you can have someone that is saying something but thinking something else at the same time. So, you can do things that way. He does that with his Spirit comics, especially if the thought bubble is a continuation of the word bubble, which is to say the character says something and then he thinks the rest of it because he's hiding something. That's what Will Eisner would do. So I would like to go with the Will Eisner method, as in you're looking at each panel as a moment in time. You can't break that moment in time by putting in more than one response in a conversation with your word balloons. And if you do, you're breaking that moment in time, and then your reader is not flowing with the art and the story, everything else. You're hemming up your reader, and he's not reading correctly. And so, again, if you go with that, then you can only put so much dialogue on a panel. But again, look at some of the dialogue that's shoved into these panels for Neil Adams. There's a lot sometimes. But at the same time, use that, and you want to economize that. You want to put in, again, I would say on average 6 panels per page. But what is the thing that's going to tell you to go down to 1 or up to 12? Again, I would say 12 maximum. That would be my preference anyways. Well, the thing is that, as Frank Miller said, he said, everything is tied to the story. It's the story that needs to just be the engine for the entire book. But at the same time, what story is going to control is tempo. And again, this is Miller speaking in that interview that I covered a couple weeks ago. This is the exact thing he said. Tempo is controlled by your story. Therefore, you got to make sure that you're putting the story in a sufficient tempo. This is where Neil Adams comes in. Okay, because this is the exact thing that Neil Adams was doing with all of his books, especially when we get into the stuff I'm showing you in the background right now. He got to a point where he was starting to play around with panels and what he wanted to do, and he was trying to do at the same time. If you look at these, most of these that I'm showing you in the background, most of these are 4, maybe 5 panels per page. But again, this is the way that Neil Adams, a very professional and big draw for comics, was doing at his height. So he could, put in more story in the way that he wanted it. But Neil Adams says over and over again, the reason why he put this really original panel structure in for his books, every book, was the fact that he wanted to control the tempo of how the reader would actually read the book. And you can see that within some of the panels you have in the background. So the point being that, again, if you have a splash page, you can use it for a slowdown, or you can use it as a startup. This is why, well, I would say one of the really important reasons why either your first page needs to be a splash page, or at the very least, one of the first 3 pages needs to be a splash page. For Thomas Valiant, I had the first page was a splash page and the second page was a double splash page. But there was a bunch more talking in the second page than there was in the first. Again, I probably broke Will Eisner's rule there. But at the same time, why would you do that? Well, you want to grab the reader's attention, first of all, and you want to give them an encapsulation of the story. But at the same time, it increases the tempo so that they're used to turning pages. If you open up the book, okay, so you're already interested in the book, you open up the cover, so you start reading, and then you read pretty quickly what's on the splash page and the first page, and then you turn the page again. This is a very good way to get your reader used to turning pages, because I'm used to, and I want to have comics that are physical copies. I'm going to sell physical copies whenever I can. So turning the page is very important for your tempo of your story, for the reader. So again, you get him turning the pages, you get him used to turning pages right with that page number 1. And again, the thing is that splash pages can be used in the opposite way as well. I used it for Thomas Valiant. There's a page in, I think it's the third chapter, about halfway through, where there is the only other splash page besides those first 3 pages in the entire book. Why? Because it's basically a dead silent moment where some catastrophe basically has just happened. Everybody's been thrown to the ground, and it's like time stops for a second. And so that's a slowdown page for how you need to take in everything that has just happened because it's after a fight. So, again, the point with Neil Adams and what he tried to do and what he talks about is how to draw the reader to move faster or slower with the tempo in reading your panels by, you know, he did it not only by putting in so many panels per page, but by how the panels were structured. And I'm going to put that back up in the background. Just 1 second. I want to put that Neil Adams stuff up in the background so you can see it again to see exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, he did it through not just the number of panels per page, but the structure of the panels on the page. But that would be an expert doing that, of course. And then he did this panel layout that was completely different than anybody else in order to, again, as he says, speed up or slow down the tempo of the reader so that they're moving faster and faster. Now, there's a page from X-Men that I don't have, I don't think on, excuse me, this slideshow, where you have basically Beast falling out of the sky. And it's very odd looking panels because they go down the center, but from diagonal, so kitty corner sort of way, from top left to bottom right. And they go on an angle downwards, panel after panel after panel. And you see Beast falling through these. And so uh, you get, what is it? A speeding up of the entire process. And that's how Neil Adams draws you into this guy is falling very fast. And so you're reading the book in that way. And again, this is very, very different than what you would get within the early X-Men books. Trust me, I have some of them. I've read them. If you're looking at Neil Adams stuff, it is extremely different. He started around 64, I think it was, for X-Men. But if you go back to the 30s and the 40s for, that is to say, numbers 30 through 50, about that, for the original X-Men comics, you have things like people falling through the sky where they're having conversations, where they're thinking about these things. I remember one actually, I think it was, I don't remember, I think it was the one with the lotus in it. I can't remember what, about 34 or so, where you have an actual editor's note at the bottom trying to explain the fact that these characters are having so many thoughts as they fall through the sky. And it basically says at the bottom of this editor's note, remember that the human mind can work much faster than the human mouth. And so he's telling you this is why they're having all these thoughts. That's not a good way to do it. And again, this bleeds into the exact thing you see within bad storytelling and bad comics today, with people talking through a fight over and over again. When I talked to Mike Barron with the interview on my channel, Mike said that this is one of the things that he never does. He says, you don't start talking in the middle of a fight. You don't have a conversation in the middle of a fight. It's not real. It's not something that you do. And I would not only agree with that, and did agree with him when I was talking to him, but it's not just that it's not real, but at the same time, if you have a fight going on, it ruins the entire tempo of what you're trying to do to get the reader to not only turn the page, but move from panel to panel to panel. Because if you have a sequence of panels and a sequence of moments, which again, each panel is a moment in time, and this is supposed to speed up with a fight because that's what happens. When you're in a fight, things speed up, trust me. And you need to speed up the tempo of your book while you're in a fight. You can't put people talking and having a conversation in the middle of it. It destroys the entire tempo of the book. Again, think about when you're reading or when you're writing or when you're drawing a comic, doesn't matter which. whether or not it's a good comic based upon these elements. Because again, the whole point is for them to tell a story and for you to actually get to the end of the story. If you put down the stupid book before you actually get to the end of the story, then they didn't do their job correctly. And so the point of the people making the comic is to get you to turn each page. And in order to get you to turn each page, they have to get you to go from panel 1 to panel 2 to panel 3 to panel 4 over and over again. Again, make sure you don't interrupt the reader in his tempo of reading, which is supposed to be drawn again once, as Neal Adams says, and he talks about it, well, actually all the time, that you need to get that tempo moving. You need to slow it down at times because you need to give the reader a bit of a slow burn. And if you have a mystery, and he does have mysteries, especially with his Batman comics, things like that, the Dead Man stuff certainly has mysteries in it. You got to slow down the reader or speed them up. So again, the tempo is controlled by the story, but it is expressed by your panel, and your panel economy is how you use those panels correctly in order to keep that tempo moving. That tempo will determine how many panels you're going to put on a page, but at the same time, don't try to be a master of the entire thing when you don't have the basics down. That's what I would say, and that's what I'm going to try to do more and more with my books. If you look at, although this is something that wasn't exactly planned, if you look at my new book, which is The Rampaging Thor, you start off with fairly dense panel layouts for a lot of what Mike Gustovich is doing. And Mike Gustovich, is a penciler from Marvel and DC from the early 80s, but he moves from there into a more, I guess, it's not even sequential art in that it's 3 panels. Sometimes you get one panel, which is a panel background, but you have the movement of a different character through those sequences. So there's usually about 3. So he tries to do that with his art for the Rampaging Thor, which is part of the Valiant Heroes, again, which you can get. You want to click on the link in the description. You can go over and take a look at some of the pages for the Rampaging Thor and the Valiant Heroes Indiegogo site. But again, this is what I want to, this is the kind of stuff that I love. This is the kind of stuff I want to talk about. This is the kind of stuff that I want people to appreciate with reading comics and making comics. That, you look at all this great stuff and you look at all these people that have made great comics and you listen to what they have to say and their instructions, and this is what you find. This is why you might put down a comic, because you think there's something wrong with this. I don't like it. It just isn't good. And again, you might figure that out by reading it and knowing these things, and especially creating a comic. And we want to make comics of merit. The comic industry right now is following the lead of Marvel since about 2009, saying they want to cut themselves off from the old history of making comics, and they want to start anew with something different. And they've just had awful comics since then. And if we want to bring back great comics and the great way of making comics, then go back to these, I don't know what you would call them, these great men of comic making and how they produced good comics. Now, I want to point out as well, before I stop talking, and I've been talking for much too long, one of the things about Neal Adams, if you're looking at the panels in the background, you see he's doing 4 panels per page for a lot of the X-Men, even some of the Dead Man as well. But at the same time, you have to remember, again, if you're an artist, even at this time, when Neal Adams was on his high point for making comics, people complained that he was too slow, that he just couldn't get the pages out on time. And there was an interview that I read. It was fairly long. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. The interviewer is a very big name. I can't for the life of me remember who it was. He interviewed so many of the big names for comics. And we're talking Jack Kirby, Gil Kane, a lot of early people for comics. And then he got into Neal Adams and he asked him this question. And he said, you have a reputation for being slow. What do you say to that? And Neal Adams did not like that question at all. Really, he did not. And you can see, because you see everything that's said in this interview, although it's in the text format. Neil Adams says, "How's about you ask that question in a different way?" That was his response because he didn't like that question at all. And so the interviewer didn't ask it in a different way. He basically asked it again. And you can see Neil Adams, even in the text, get a little bit upset with this statement. But again, this was his reputation. At that time, he was just a slow artist, but he was saying, okay, sure, I might have been slow, but you have to remember exactly just how many comics that I had to do. And I was doing covers and I was doing all these other things. Now, that may have been a good reason. It may have been an excuse on the part of Neil Adams. I don't know. I will take him at his word and say he had a lot on his plate, doing a lot of different things. But my point being, here you have a guy who is the top of his game in the comic industry when he was working, and still he had to, well, he should have, anyways. He was trying to stretch the medium to do something that was completely new, and that was with his tempo and his odd panel layouts and all these kinds of things. But that made him slow. And again, starting out in comics, especially if you're making comics, if you're an artist, you can't do that. You gotta start from the basics, and even when you work up to something like Neil Adams, then you're still going to be slow if you're going to be doing stuff like that. Anyways, that's my rant about panel layout and panel economy that started off from a few things that I learned about the early Barry Windsor Smith stuff from Conan and Marvel. Anyways, I might talk a little bit more about it depending on how many questions I have here in the comments. I'm going to say hello to a couple people and then start answering any questions that you have here. Let's see. Stress level is here. How you doing, stress level? That's great. Who else we got here? Greg is here. Oh, Greg, I missed you last week. You just came in at the end, I think. I just saw one comment from you. Glad to see that you're here. Calliope is here. Great, great. Let's see. Da-da-da. Who else is here? Lord is here. How you doing? Tony is here. How you doing? You say, hey, RJ. I'm doing great, Tony. How you doing? Let's see. Let's see. Who else is here? We got Mystic. How you doing? I think it's Mystic. And scrolling down, see who else is here. See if we got any questions. Hopefully, you're enjoying the Neil Adams art in the background. Let's see. Let's see. Mystic has a comment here that I'll read, I think. He says, I looked at John Buscema's Wikipedia page and I saw that he died on my 18th birthday. That's well, I find it kind of sad that we're losing so many great artists, and even Barry Windsor Smith. He hasn't died yet, but I think he was about last month or so in the hospital for, it might have been a stroke. I'm not entirely sure. So, he was one of the young guys. Barry Windsor Smith was when I was reading comics. He was the new fresh thing. So, it's unfortunate that we're losing so many comic greats. Hopefully, as I'm trying to find, there is enough out there of not only their work but what they say and what they're trying to teach to leave us exactly the blueprint of how to make great comics. Vaz is here. How you doing? Let's see. He says, with the price of comics, I took the habit of counting the effective number of pages/panels. Most of the time, they are doing so many single page panels and double page spread that I felt cheated. Exactly. And this is leads into something else I wanted to say. Now, if you're looking at someone that, well, let me start here. If you're looking at a lot of the people who are doing crowdfunded comics right now, they're doing a lot of 90s style comics. And I don't think that's the way to go. I would go with 80s styles comic, 80s style comics. And that's what I do with my books. Why? Well, partly I don't think they're as good for storytelling, but I don't think they're as good for art either. Why? Because at that time you got all the, which would later become the Image people that were doing the art and the story for Marvel and some of DC. But at the same time, these were people who are getting to be of superstar status within the comic world, and even within the larger world, they're becoming household names. You had people like, oh, Rob Liefeld going on the late night show and things like that. And I think Todd McFarlane did as well. So these people were becoming stars unto their own right. And so people were actually buying the books for just the art, or to see the art, or to actually see something created by these superstars. And I think the story suffered for it. And not only because they tried to do, like, Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld took over writing their books, their respective books, and they're just not good writers. I'm sorry, but they're not. Not only that, but at the same time, you'll see them do this splash page every second page, these double splash pages in the middle of the book, all these kinds of things. And again, I felt cheated back in the 90s when they did that. And they thought they could do that because they were playing off of their 90s celebrity status, and thought that they could push the envelope with panel economy. And I don't think it worked. And that's why I don't think you should imitate 90s styles in crowdfunded comics right now, even though so many people are, because you're not giving your audience their bang for their buck. You're just not. I'm trying to do the 80s style. I'm trying to, well, I would go back to the 70s style, but again, the 70s style gives you something that's much denser, and I don't think modern readers would actually deal with the density of a 70s comic being reproduced today. But the 80s give you that sweet spot where it's not as dense as the 70s, especially with word balloons and massive amounts of story within, sandwiched over top of the art, all that kind of stuff. But you have panel economy within the 80s as well. So again, yeah, that's exactly. I felt the same way. Let's see. Elijah's here. How you doing? Da-da-da. Those are some good looking action scenes. I think you're probably talking about Neil Adams, but yes, good looking action scenes as well. Ta-da. He also says, John Buscema is one of my favorite artists. His Thor run is amazing. Well, I really like John Buscema, but unfortunately, my favorite artist, or one of my favorite artists, would be Walter Simonson. So having to take over from Walter Simonson and move to Thor, to me, I didn't like John Buscema at that point, just because you're taking over from Walter Simonson. You can't do that. Yeah, it was really something that I didn't want to see at that point. But at the same time, he did make great Thor comics. I agree. Let's see. Scrolling down. I'm gonna read a couple more comics. Don't or comments. I don't know if these are for me, but I'll read them anyways. Vaz says, one of the worst offenders in the last few weeks was The Wild Cosmos. 26 pages of art, but if I count according to the double page spread, it has 17 pages, a bunch of them white and black spreads. Yeah. Again, this is exactly what I try not to do. I agree. This is breaking panel economy. You're not giving your reader exactly the amount of story that, again, they feel entitled to and are entitled to for how much money they gave you. But at the same time, turning the pages, keep them going fast enough so that they go from panel to panel. For me, anyways, Thomas Valiant, my first book, was 80 pages. And again, there's only 3 splash pages, basically. Page number 1, page 2 and 3 is the double splash page, which I was introducing the characters. So basically, I wanted to get all the characters on the second and third splash page, although it didn't come out in print very well. And then there's 1 page, I think probably around page 68 or so, maybe into the 70s, might be 72, of Thomas Valiant. So that's all you get. The rest, you have very dense panel development, and I let Renzo go. Said, go to town, Renzo, and see what you can do with this, that, and the other thing. And he came up with some amazing panel sequences, especially within the first, I think, like 10 pages, he does a moment in time, a very quick moment in time where Thomas Valiant is pulling himself back like a rubber band and then shooting himself into the air as a ball. So that was an amazing panel sequence that Renzo just came up with himself. So yeah, you try to give your audience exactly what they paid for. So let me see here. I'm going to put that beautiful art back up in the background one more time, at least. See if I can get through some of these comments again. Faz has a lot of great examples. Let's see. Let's see. He says as well, do you give the page layout decision to the artist, or you decide beforehand how each page will look like when you create the script? Well, for me, again, I talked about this a little bit last week. Depends on the artist that I'm working with. Some artists just won't like a full script, and you just got to deal with it if you want to work with that artist. Mostly I like to write full scripts, but at the same time, I would say 2/3 of the pages I give either a very firm panel layout, or at the very least a good suggestion of the panel layout, and the other 1/3 I would leave up to Renzo, because again, Renzo, when he wants to come up with something new, great, and I want to see what Renzo can do, and so we can use those as a template for what he can do in the future. Again, for when I wrote the script for Thomas Valiant #2, and for the Valiant Heroes, I was constantly looking back at Thomas Valiant #1 at the pages where Renzo did his own thing, so that I could see exactly how he could work with how many pages and how many panels per page, because sometimes panels are going to dictate what kind of panel they're going to be just by what action needs to be shown. If you have a square panel as panel #1, it's going to probably determine a lot of the structure of the rest of your page. And so I was able to see, if I'm going to start a new page, if my square panel in the top right hand corner of panel #1 is going to dictate how the rest of the panels are going to go. Look back at Thomas Valiant and say, how did Renzo deal with this in the past? And how did he do this himself? So again, I try to do both at the same time. And if my artists come to me and say, this just isn't working, I can't put that many panels per page, it's just not going to happen, then I'm going to have to restructure the page. There's only, like I say, usually I would write the script, and there is some pages that I say, this is the panel layout. And there's some pages which I say, this is my idea for a panel layout, take it or leave it. Some pages where I say, go to town, Renzo, do whatever you want with this page. Just try to get the panel number that I need in there, because I'll write, 6 panels and say, fit them in as best you can. But usually there are about 2 pages per book where I will actually structure the entire thing and do a mock-up of the page and then give it to Renzo. Say, for this page, this is how you're going to have to do it. Again, for the last book, which was printed, was Thomas Valiant. For the 80 pages, I think that was 1, maybe 2 out of the 80 pages I did that for. So yeah, there's a lot of different things. And again, for right now, what I'm doing is Renzo gave me all the pages back for the Valiant Heroes. And what I'm doing is I'm seeing how my script will fit into it. And I'm economizing my script and my word balloons, sometimes moving word balloons from one panel to a next, making sure that all that happens. So it's a process. It's very much a process. Maybe you don't want to do as much of that process as I do, but I find it exhilarating. Let's see. I'm not sure if this comment is for me. Puffy says, wow, I just popped in and he's yelling at me about tempo over and over and over again. Oh, well, that's me. I'm just ranting. Hopefully you stayed, Puffy. Let's see. Just scrolling down. Puffy also says, all right, Mr. Fletcher, I'll reach your tempo. I'm sorry, I don't off the top of my head get that reference. Who's Mr. Fletcher? But anyways, Scrolling down, let's see if we got any more comments. Let's see. Scrolling down. Philip says, looking forward to that book, Crom the Destroyer. I take it is what you're talking about. I'm glad to hear that. That's great to hear. I'm trying to get as much hype for Crom the Destroyer as possible. Like I said, there's only about 13, 14 days left for the campaign for Crom the Destroyer. We're about, I think, $13,000 in right now. Hopefully we can push that up to 20,000 before the end of the campaign. If you're looking to get any of the stretch goal additions that go with the book, you have to order within the original campaign time limit. So just to let everybody know. Let's see. Greg has a comment about something else. He says, so the Barbie movie is running amok. What's your 2 cents on it? What's my 2 cents on it? I didn't go see it, nor am I planning to go see it, nor do I really care to even watch it. So I don't know what my 2 cents on it are, except for the fact that if people want to move from ridiculing the quote unquote progressive entertainment into subverting the progressive entertainment so that it actually serves our purpose, great. That gives the progressives a taste of their own medicine. That's my 2 cents, I guess. 2 cents on it. Let's see. Here's a question for me. Magma says, RJ, this is off topic, but in one of your videos, you mentioned you're not a fan of Dragon Ball Z. Did you watch it and hate it, or are you just indifferent to it? I'm indifferent to it. I watch, if I'm watching anime, I'm watching things that are very short series. I do not and just cannot get into anything that large. I can't. And Dragon Ball Z is immense. I mean, it's not as big as One Piece. I tried the biggest anime that I tried to get into was Bleach, and I just gave up after a while. That was a while ago. That was probably almost 15 years ago now. Was Bleach on 15 years ago now? I was watching it on, I don't remember, whatever Cartoon Network it was on at that time. It went, as I said before, it went Eureka 7 and then Bleach, and after, or was it Bleach and then Eureka 7? No, how did it go? It went Naruto, Bleach, Eureka 7, and then Death Note, if I remember correctly. Anyways, yeah, I like short series. That's about it. So I never got into it, and I won't get into something that's that big. I don't have the time. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see. There's a question for me. Tony says, what are your thoughts on Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow? I'm not a big fan of Alan Moore. I talked to, who was it? Connor Tomlinson on one of the interviews that I did. Connor works for the Lotus Eaters. He does pop culture analyzing, but at the same time, he does a lot of comic analyzing as well. If you're actually subscribed to the Lotus Eaters, you'll get a lot more of that than what is just up on YouTube. They analyze, he and others from the Lotus Eaters analyze comics a lot. And I would agree with him. I talked to him about Alan Moore, and I really, really don't like Alan Moore. And he said Alan Moore and the English invasion of American comics was part of the problem with American comics and part of the beginning of the downfall of American comics. So I won't talk about this story in particular, but really don't like Alan Moore. Even when I was reading Excalibur, which was done entirely, I think, by Alan Davis. I'm not entirely sure he did the story for the first ones or if he was doing just the art, but he moved into doing both the story and the art. So I love that series. I read it from issue number 1. I love the X-Men before that. So it went into Excalibur. And again, with Alan Davis art, that was beautiful. I love that series. And I wanted to go back and read the Captain Britain, which was what a lot of the story came from, because it was Alan Moore and Alan Davis doing the art. And I went back and bought the old magazines. And even back then, even that original stuff, I really did not like the Alan Moore stuff, even back with that beautiful art, the characters that I loved, the storytelling that I loved, because it was the support system for all of Excalibur, but still don't like Alan Moore. I just don't. Sorry to say, if you're an Alan Moore fan. Now I just have to scroll back up because I lost my place by going to re-up that. Um, let's see, re-up the art in the background. All right, scrolling up, scrolling down. Got to see where the heck I was. Oh, here I was. Okay, take this off the screen. Let's see. I think Philip has a comment for me. I'm not entirely sure. Or sorry, it's Puffy. Says, I've always noticed comic pages have a vague sense of layout that allow you to know which frame comes first and last, usually left to right. Do you understand how that works specifically? Well, this is something I actually tried to break with Thomas Valiant number one. There are two pages where um, I figured basically you have people going down into a basement and then going around in almost a maze like pattern. So I thought to myself, I'm going to use the panel gutters for this, or at the very least, take the panel for them going. They start at the top left and then they go towards the right in a very thin panel, and then they go down an elevator shaft, which is the panel gutter that's connected on the right hand side, and then they go across the page from right to left and then up into the center part of the panel itself. Now, some people really, really like that, and I did have to put an arrow in at a certain point just to make sure people knew exactly where to go. And but my letterer said, "You can't do that," and I said, "Yeah, I'm doing it." Also, there's a few people who reviewed my book. Some of them said this was amazing. They loved it. Others said this was the worst thing in the entire book. You don't do this with comics. So, anyways, some people you're going to tick off if you don't do it the right way. So, yes, the vague sense of panel layout is you're doing American comics, you go top to bottom, right to left. That's pretty much it. You can see within some 80s comics, you'll notice that if they're in any way confusing about where to go from panel to panel, they'll actually use a little arrow to say, go from this panel to that panel. And yeah, it's something that I don't even know if I can explain it because I'm so used to it. I'm a hyper visual person, and I became a hyper visual person because I grew up on comics, and that's everything to me is a comic. Everything to me is a storyboard layout. Whenever I read a novel, I visualize the entire thing. The entire thing to me is panel, 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 either panel layout or a movie, one or the other. So yeah, everything is visual to me. But so, and I say that because I grew up on reading right to left, top to bottom, through the panel layouts that they used in the 80s. So to me, it's so second nature from the time I could not even read that I don't know if I could express exactly how to answer your question, Puffy. But I know from the videos that I've done back in 2017, where Marvel was doing on their Twitter page how to read a comic, and I'm thinking to myself, you have to make a video to tell people how to read a comic. You got to go from left to right, top to bottom. That's it. But people don't. I was flabbergasted by the fact that people don't understand this. Again, if you don't understand it, it's my training, the way my mind was trained. But yeah, that's the exact opposite of what you're going to get within. Well, not the exact opposite. Within manga, you're going to go if you're reading the original panel layout and they didn't flip the page. You're going from pages which are the opposite of how you read a book within Western civilization, and you're also going from right to left and then from top to bottom. So again, yeah. Hopefully that answered your question. I don't know if I can answer it any more than that. Let's see who's here. Breaker came in a bit late. He says, go and rewind and speed up to get to the topic. Okay, very good. You probably caught up to me by now. Let's see what else we got here. Elijah says, RJ, What do you think about Paul Kippenberg's art? I think it's great. Kupen? I'm really bad with names. Kupenberg. I don't know, honestly. Quite honestly, to me, that's not a name I recognize off the top of my head. I might know his art and don't even know what art to attach the name to, so I couldn't actually answer that question. Scrolling down. Let's see. Uh, Somebody talking about 90s comics. Mystic says, I will have a certain affection for Todd McFarlane because he is a Calgary native. John Byrne was also living in the city while working on X-Men. Uh, I honestly, I honestly find that the Todd McFarlane stuff, he was the first really big superstar within Marvel that was brought up as a superstar. But his early stuff, if you're looking at the long shot and his um, early Spider-Man and early Hulk, all of which I own, and really bought back in the 80s when it came out. Yeah, that stuff is massively different from what you would get later on, even with his Marvel run when he started to become really big. I think that he has a lot more merit in his early stuff than he does when he was probably, yes, living in Calgary than anything else. Oh, Taz is here and he's given me a $2 super chat, £2 super chat. Thank you very much, Taz. I always glad to see you in the comments. And I did not know that you actually spoke with an English accent. If you give me £2, I take it you do. I I did not know that. Let's see. Scrolling down a little bit. Let's see. Um, Tony says, "What are your thoughts on Mark Wade? Or sorry, Mark. I take it that's probably Mark Wade's and Alex Ross's Kingdom Come. Um, Quite honestly, right now, if anything has Mark Wade's, well, actually, I'm basically done with modern comics right at this point. Because first of all, they just tick me off too much. Secondly, there's nothing good to read, and thirdly, my comic shop closed down, so I really don't have access to much new comics right now. The local comic shop, which is still a journey from where I am out in the woods. But anyway, um, if so, I was just about to say anything that right now it has Mark Wade's name on it, I set it down again if I get into a comic shop. But if we go back to Kingdom Come, when that series originally came out, it was just the most beautiful thing in the world, quite honestly. Um, I think that Alex Ross has never topped himself when doing anything else. I have his new Fantastic Four stuff. It's still nowhere near as beautiful as that Kingdom Come stuff. And again, you put in the Mark Wade story. I didn't really back then. I didn't know who Mark Wade was. Really had no clue. I just knew that I read his name when I read Kingdom Come, and honestly, I haven't read the entire series since it originally came out when I first bought it at my local comic store. So I couldn't tell you exactly what I disliked or liked about the story, but at the time, again, um, when you're looking at something like that, which was an Elseworld, because that's what it was an Elseworld, and it was billed as an Elseworld. So yeah, that would work at that time. Right now, it wouldn't work because there's just too many stories outside of continuity, too many things going on, and it just wouldn't work today. But again, it worked back then. And for Wade's writing, I can't speak to it again since I haven't read it for Kingdom Come, anyways, since the 80s. Um, but I don't like his writing now or any of the things he's doing with comics. But, anyways, scrolling down a little bit, let's see if Greg's comment is for me. He says, in the 70s and the 80s, there was a manly generation making stuff. The Forgotten Generation brought back Americana from the 50s. I would quite agree. Exactly. You had people, quite honestly, you had a lot of people who, I guess in the 70s and the 80s, you still had a lot of war comics. You still had people who recognized the tragedy of war and even going into the whole, Vietnam thing, they still understood exactly how awful or war was in some way. So yeah, there were manly men, and they knew exactly how much that affected people. Let's see. Quite honestly, if you were growing up, and I'm sure a lot of you here probably were, within the 80s, every second story was about Vietnam. Or if you got any kind of story besides that, it would be going back to World War II. So yeah, the people drawing off of that tragic memory in the history of the country and the world really made for good storytelling. Let's see. Scrolling down, see if I can get some more comments here. I've already been talking for an hour. What are your thoughts on Dynamite's interpretation of Red Sonja? I don't like it. I tell you that right now. There's some good books there, but again, you got what's her name? Oh, who the heck? The one that was writing Red Sonja at the end. Yeah, that was awful. Um, but again, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Uh, but yeah, she's a bad writer. Uh, if you look at, I don't know, if you look at some of the stuff for Dynamite, I'm not that familiar with all of it. I can tell you that right now. I'm much more familiar with the Marvel stuff. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of what they did with Red Sonja. A lot because, well, they tried to mess with the lore of Red Sonja. And again, if you know the lore of Red Sonja, the actual lore of Red Sonja, it's the fact that when it's basically what you would get within Goblin Slayer right now. If you're not a fan of Red Sonja and you don't know what I'm talking about, think Goblin Slayer. So basically, some raiders came to her village and destroyed the entire thing. She was a young girl at the time, not too young, but young enough, so that basically they ravaged her, and she prayed to her goddess. I think it was Mithra or one of the, I'm not entirely sure what god it was. But she prayed that this would never happen to her again. And she was given a blessing where no man could ever defeat her in, I don't know if it was either in battle or just in sword battle. It was one or the other, but no man after that point could ever defeat her in battle. And so, um, if I, and again, I am I'm struggling with trying to remember the entire lore. She was looking for basically a husband by looking for someone who could defeat her at swordplay. But anyway, they basically jettisoned that entire thing and came up with their own lore. So yeah, not a big fan. Let's see if we can get through some of these comments with a little more speed. Let's see. Higgs says, "Hey RJ, just stopped by to say hello and thank you for sharing all the Conan with X on Twitter. Crom is a great comic. Wish you all the best. Great to hear. Thank you very much. Yes, and I'm trying to share as much inspiration for Crom the Destroyer on Twitter as I can by posting a lot of the Red Sonja stuff and the Conan stuff and some Dungeons and Dragons things and some Robert E. Howard things besides that. So yeah, if you can follow me on Twitter. It's RJ of the Island. Again, link for that is in the description as well. So scrolling down, let's see. Breaker says, when it comes to big anime, I prefer reading the manga. There's no stupid filler arcs to waste time on. Good to know. Scrolling down, let's see. Scrolling down, that too, but I was referring to the Rampaging Thor. Okay, great. I'm glad that you're looking forward to the Rampaging Thor. That one is going to test my limits because I'm going to have to, I want to actually rewrite the script in some parts of it to make sure I don't get in the way of a lot of the beautiful art that you have from Mike. Yes, sorry, I'm working with so many artists; it's hard to remember. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Rex is here. He says one of my favorites for anime is Outlaw Star, 26 episodes, middle ground and not overly optimistic or pessimistic. Also a joke. Also, as a joke, punching Alan Moore in the face is on my bucket list. That's funny. I was watching one of Graham Nolan's discussions with who was it? I think it was John Romita Jr. on his channel. It's probably still up there. I'm sure it is actually still up on Graham Nolan's channel. And that's one of the comments that John Romita Jr. said. I think Graham had asked him, "What is the worst character to draw?" And John Romita Jr.'s answer to that was Jack of Hearts. Definitely Jack of Hearts. I hated drawing that character. I want to find the person who designed that character, go and punch his mother in the face. That's how much I hate drawing this character. That's what he said a long time ago. Well, actually, he was drawing it a long time ago. He said that to Graham probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. All right, scrolling down, let's see. Calliope says, RJ, I read the new Teen Titans and the Uncanny X-Men comic books when I was a kid. I try not to get irritated when people whose only access to Teen Titans and the X-Men are the cartoons. Your feelings? Oh, I was hoping that I could get through some of these comments with speed, but no, I'm not. Oh, one of the things that drives me absolutely batty, if you listen to my early videos on my channel and I'm going over a lot of the stuff that came out from Marvel, especially those podcasts within 2018, 2019, 2020. All you hear is these people who are working on comics, especially for Marvel right now, saying, "Oh, well, my first introduction to comics was I watched the X-Men television series." And I'm going, that is not an introduction to comics. That is an introduction to a cartoon. I'm sorry, but if these people are saying that this is their introduction to comics and then they start working for Marvel, I'm sorry. I'm gonna. If you have earphones on, I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. And it's the same thing with the Teen Titans over at DC. You have these people who have absolutely no connection to the past. They don't read the old comics. They don't go back and read them. Their first introduction to things is cartoons, and they barely ever move past that. Maybe read the Wikipedia page or something for the character. That's about it. And then they start writing the character. It's ridiculous. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that really drives me batty, Calliope. I'm sure it drives you batty as well, because they think they can make comics by writing by watching cartoons, and they can't. Let's go back to Will Eisner and his lectures for, what is it, the sequential art class, basically telling them you can't do that. You can move from a comic book to the screen with what you have on television or movies, but you can't move in the other direction. It doesn't work that way. The stream does not go backwards. You want to, and these people want to take what they've seen on the screen and translate it back into comics, and it doesn't work. It makes extremely bad comics. Okay, I'm done there. That's my little rant on that. But yeah, let's see. Scrolling down a little bit. Vaz says, do you think having arrows for reading order in some difficult panels as a fail? Well, actually, I did it in Thomas Valiant #1. So no, I don't think it's a fail. Really, some of these newer comics should probably put these in, but they don't. The same reason they don't use word balloons. They think it's too cartoony. And again, what did comics grow out of? It grew out of cartoons. I'm sorry, but not actual animation cartoons, but comic cartoons. So yeah, these people are ridiculous. I don't think you should use it all the time. I don't think you should stretch the panel layout that much so that you need them all the time. Once per book, maybe. Again, I had an 80-page book, so that's 3 floppies, or actually more than 3 floppies. It's almost, if it's actually 3 very large floppies. And I used it twice, but at the same time, it was for the exact same panel layout, because you had people going down into this maze. It was a maze, right? So that was the only time that I would use it. So yeah, I wouldn't use it a lot, but again, I don't think it's a fail. But maybe I'll learn different. Maybe I'll start reading a lot about making comics and the comic crates, and they won't agree with me on that. So, but for right now, I would say no, it's not a fail, but don't use it very often. Let's see. Scrolling down, Calliope, Mystic says, my first exposure to X-Men was the 90s animated series. So, yeah, your first exposure. That's the thing. First exposure, not your only exposure, your first exposure. Sure, a lot of people came to it that way, but if that's where you stop and you think you can make comics, no, it doesn't work. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Let's see. What else we got here? Taz says, hey, RJ, Bernard Kurgstein is one of my old school favorites. Again, I'm awful with names. Let's see. I can never say his name correctly to begin with, even when I actually am prepared for it. He drew the Swamp Thing comic black and white, especially with those cross hatchings and details. Yes, I know exactly who you're talking about, even though I can't pronounce his name. One of the things that he did within his Swamp Thing comics, again, he did, and it wasn't an interview. It was a bit of an interview. Who did he do that with? I can't remember at the top of my head. It was an old, very old documentary sort of, it was only like a half hour documentary about comics. And it was probably from like 1985, 1986. And he was talking about making Swamp Thing at that time. Uh, who the heck did he do it for? I don't remember. But anyway, he talked about how things worked differently in his world, how he drew things differently in his world. Because at some point, I can't remember the issue of Swamp Thing, they took Batman into and put him into the Swamp Thing storyline. And he said, when they did that, I said to myself, okay, Batman is not going to be the Batman that you're going to see in the other comics. He's going to basically step through a mirror, like, through the looking glass. He has stepped through the looking glass into the Swamp Thing world. So he's going to look as I see fit as an artist in the Swamp Thing world. And he drew Batman. Now, you might not think that this is something odd because you see it so many times after this in the 90s and later on with other artists, but he was the first one to put very long pointy ears on Batman, and also to have that big flowing cape that's too big for him to actually manage. That would be his art. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful artist. I agree. If you look at his, I think his Frankenstein stuff, it is just amazing. It will blow you away. So yeah, can't pronounce the man's name to save my life, but yeah, I know his art. It's amazing. Scrolling down. Let's see. Oh, by the way, on that Frankenstein stuff, he also said that when he drew that, he tried to put himself into the mindset of basically the time frame that Mary Shelley was actually writing the Frankenstein book, so that he wouldn't use anything in the backgrounds or the foregrounds even that would not be there within Mary Shelley's mind, because again, that would be written or that would exist after her writing the book. So yeah, not only beautiful artist, very detailed, and yes, his cross hatching, especially on his black and white stuff, is amazing. But yeah, he was an artist in trying to do things like that for his Frankenstein stuff, which again, I would say go and look that stuff up if you've never seen his Frankenstein stuff. Even if you just see a couple of panels of it, you will be amazed. Scrolling down, let's see, scrolling down. I don't think that comment's for me, so I'll scroll down a little more. Let's see. Calliope says, the original stories in the comics are better than the cartoons. He's talking to Mystic. Please trust me on that. These comics are why I obsessively love these characters. Yes, indeed. Indeed. The comics are just so much better. A lot of people would say, if you watch the anime, go back and read the manga. And that's exactly what I would say with anything that you will find for North American cartoons. If it's off a comic, even if it's a show or a movie, if you like those characters, go back and read the comics. Don't read the comics for today. Don't go into your comic shop and look for stuff today, because you're not going to get the same thing. The stories that you see on the screen, whether it's in cartoons or good movies, not the Miss Marvel garbage that you're going to get, but with the new characters. But most of the good stories that you're looking at are from the 80s and the 90s, some from the 2000s. But go back to those books and read those. You want to be amazed at storytelling. Let's see, scrolling down. Da-da-da, scrolling down. I think that Mystic and Calliope are having a good conversation in the comments. I'll leave that be. Let's see. Tom, if this question hasn't already been answered, you say, so is this stream just asking your thoughts on random comic book stuff? Well, that's what all my streams turn into. But at the same time, I'm talking about, well, I was talking about at the first panel, economy and how to draw the eye of the reader so that you make sure you put the correct number of panels per page in correct form with correct dialogue, all that kind of stuff. That's what I started off talking about. Let's see, scrolling down. Da, 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 da. Let's see. I'm not sure. Pedro has a question, but I don't think it's for me about manga. So scrolling down. Let's see. Scrolling down. Oh, Puffy's answering my question from about half an hour ago. The Fletcher thing is a reference to Whiplash. Mr. Fletcher is an extreme jazz artist. The character known for drilling the main character, a drummer, to the bone. I am not familiar with that at all. Oh, John, you're in the comments. There's John from John's Longbox. Everybody go on over and subscribe to John's Longbox. He does great showcases of older comics. Hopefully you're still here, John, so you can hear what I have to say. He says, I woke up from a nice relaxing sleep, realized that RJ is streaming. I screamed that at my wife. RJ is streaming. Glad to hear, John. Hopefully I don't kill somebody on your work site by keeping you up too late. John is a what is the electrician? I think he works on some very heavy work sites as well. So hopefully I'm not going to keep him up too long. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Great. He's on the couch watching. Well, I'm not sure there's how much to watch. You're just watching Neil Adams in the background. Listen to me rant. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Puffy says, I asked RJ about Hollywood's hate for redheads several streams ago. Have you thought about it since? I don't know. I really don't understand where it comes from, except to the fact that if you're a redhead, you're really white. That's about it. They hate white people, and yeah, I have redheads in my family, and you get to be mostly red-haired people are extremely pale. How's that? You get to be very white. You're from northern climes a lot of the time. You're Scottish or possibly Norwegian or things like that. So you're talking way north. You're talking people where even Scotland today is like 90% white still. So yeah, I think that's where the hatred of redheads probably comes from. The fact that you're looking at a white person and you got no way of making any bones about that. So that would be my thought on it. That's about it. Let's see, scrolling down. Oh, Sound Engraver is here as well. Let's see what Sound Engraver has to say. Stopping by to chat and say hello, listening in the background. Great to hear. Again, as with John's Longbox, Sound Engraver too has her own channel. She talks about a lot of musical things to do with what you're seeing within, I would say, analyzing bad entertainment today. So you could go over and give Sound Engraver a subscription to her channel. That'd be great if you're interested in that kind of thing. Let's see. Scrolling down. Did I ever watch Cowboy Bebop? Yes and no. I could not get through all of Cowboy Bebop. Why? Because why? I don't know why. Quite honestly, it's the whole space thing. If it wasn't set in space, I probably would have watched a lot more of Cowboy Bebop than I did, because Samurai Champloo was great. I loved Samurai Champloo, done by the same man. I can't remember even if I could, I probably couldn't pronounce his name, his Japanese name. I'm going to put Crom the Destroyer in the background here so that you're looking at some of the art for Crom the Destroyer while I talk. So yeah, I really like his storytelling, uh, but at the same time, there's something, I don't know what it is. Anime plus space, it's, I don't know why it gets to me, but I can't really get into it a lot. There's only a certain number, um, and even those ones that are set in outer space that I like, usually come down to earth for a lot of what they have to tell the story in. I can't remember what the heck the name of the. There's an '80s anime where they're fighting a alien invasive species called the Jam on another planet, but they go not into outer space to get to this other planet. They go through a portal that's at the South Pole, I think it is, in Antarctica. Anyways, that was a great story. It fell down within the ending. I think they shouldn't have um, cut it off when they were just getting to a high point. But yeah, there's something about space and anime that throws me off. I don't know what it is. So that's possibly why. Um, let's see. Possibly why I really couldn't get through Samurai Champloo. Not entirely sure. But again, he's a great storyteller. Couldn't get through Cowboy Bebop. I loved Samurai Champloo. Let's see. Scrolling down. What else we got here? Taz says, London born and bred Cockney accent. Great to hear. Great to Uh, I love, you know, I love people with accents. I really do. I started my channel and I said to myself, you know, I do have an accent. I know I have an accent. Most people can't place it because it's um, basically uh, northern New England mixed with a little bit of of the very, very north tip of New England. But anyways, um, I said to myself, are you going to get rid of your accent to try to speak more clearly? When I was going to start my channel, I said, no, I'm going to use my normal voice. People could just put up with my accent. And I don't think that was in any way a bad decision. Scrolling down, let's see. Uh, I got a lot of comments to get through, and I've been here for an hour and a half. Usually, I only like to start for an hour. Let's see if I can get through some more. I hope I won't have to cut everything off and not get to some of your comments. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Let's see. I'm not sure that comment was for me. There's a good comment here, but I'll see what Tom has to say. While exploring 70s and 80s comics, I found Marvel 2-in-1 and Duffy's run on Luke Cage and Iron Fist to be perfect sources of simple comic book fun. Have you read one? I do have a lot of Luke Cage, Power Man, and Iron Fist. I do have some of the old Iron Fist as well, where it was just Iron Fist. It's not my favorite book, quite honestly, and neither was Marvel 2-in-1. They always seem to have great stories on the cover, but they never really materialized because they seem to be a reset comic. That is to say, they couldn't do anything except for the one shot of the two characters together. So they really couldn't put in anything that was going to be character development. Therefore, there's always a reset. So it's basically episodic, is the way that it would be described by Plato. Or was it Aristotle? I think it's Aristotle. Yeah, episodic. There you go, Puffy. I mentioned Aristotle. So yeah, episodic is not the greatest thing in the world. But yeah, there are some fun books there. Again, some of the things like, what was it? I still remember some of those stories. So yeah, they've stuck with me. Like, I think one of those would be when Luke Cage and Power Man and Iron Fist were stuck somewhere. I'm not sure again if it was the South Pole or the North Pole. It was somewhere where it was extremely cold, and Power Man was able to keep himself from freezing to death because he basically had rock hard skin, so it didn't really affect him that much. But Iron Fist had to basically use his power to keep himself warm by basically putting it towards himself. Anyways, those kinds of intricate storytelling elements was great, if you ask me. So yeah, there was some great stories, but not all of them. Let's see. Scrolling down. Buffy says, "Forgive me, RJ and Calliope. I learned about those characters from TV. I wouldn't claim to know their comic history. I thought, though I have done a lot of research, am I spared from your wrath?" Yes, you're spared from wrath. You're doing research, certainly, but the best research is to go back and read old comics. Yeah, you want to know about good storytelling. If you want to double, triple your excitement for what you feel within watching television shows or anything, even especially the cartoons, go and read the comics. I fully endorse that. Go to your local comic shop and look for those books. I'm sure they're probably not too expensive. They're probably, if you get a good comic shop, less expensive than what you would pay per issue than new comics right now. All right, scrolling down, see if I can get to the bottom here. Pedro says, "My first comic was Dick Tracy." Great. That's great to hear. Great storytelling, just like Will Eisner and his spirit. Was an old comic from my dad who didn't collect them, but the story was complete. My first introduction to superhero genre was the death of Superman. It's funny, you mentioned the death of Superman. When the death of Superman came out, I had so much of a backlog of comics that I had to buy in my pile. Well, I guess I would be a whale back then. I collected or ordered so many from my local comic shop, and that event was so big that they had to hire extra staff the day that even the week actually that book came in. That's how big the death of Superman was. You had pieces in the local paper about it. And this, probably every paper in North America was running a story about the death of Superman. So yeah, that entire week they had to hire extra staff at the comic shop, and I was one of the extra staff hired from my local comic shop, and I was working for comics because I owed them so much money because my pull list was so large. Anyways, yeah, great way to get into comics. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Uh, yeah, I'm with Calliope here. He says, "I have no wrath for people." Let's see. "I have no wrath for you, Puffy. I encourage you to find those stories that inspired the cartoons. The cartoons are just not as good as the books." Yes, I double, triple on that sentiment for me. Scrolling down. Let's see. Scrolling down. Da, da, da. See if I can get into these last comments. Magma says, "Is the average Batman comic better than the animated series?" That's hard to say. You're getting into Batman. So this is DC rather than Marvel. I was thinking mostly about Marvel. Um, the whole, what's his name? Tim Sales. That style of Batman is completely different than the comics. It really is. It is the same character, but the stylized version of that that cartoon itself was something that was completely different than the comics. You're comparing apples and oranges there, if you ask me. And you're getting into something really much grittier when you go to the comics, even the 80s comics. When you're going back that far for Batman stories. Why? Because the cartoons, they had so many limitations. Really, some that you probably wouldn't even think of. You can't put smoking or drinking. They can't put too much violence. All these kinds of things. And even though the comics were under the comic code, um, at that time when I'm talking about the 80s, Batman stuff, and even into the 90s, it's a much different beast entirely. Whereas most of the Marvel stuff was drawn almost exclusively from the X-Men stories themselves. Almost, I would say, some of them word for word, some of them just inspirations, but the Batman is much more its own beast. Let's see. Da, da, da. Scrolling down to the last of these comments. Pedro says it was for you, RJ. Sorry, Pedro. Let me see if I can scroll up and see what the comment was. See if I can get to that one. Oh, Pedro says, what read do you recommend for a person trying comics for the first time? Manga doesn't count. Huh. It depends on really what you have access to, Pedro. Um, really, if you're buying, I don't know what my recommend would be. If you're buying comics from your comic shop and you can't get entire runs, you would want to go for something that is probably much more of a condensed storytelling. So you're looking at early 80s. Things like John Byrne's X-Men or John Byrne's Fantastic Four. Those would be great stories to get into. You could probably find those in trade paperback as well. If you're looking for something that's in a trade paperback and a longer story, instead of trying to go by floppies, Walter Simonson's Thor would be top of my list. Also, what else would be there? If you're looking for, again, I would go with really good artists as well. Excalibur, which I talked about earlier, the Alan Moore stuff, things like that. Those are immensely successful and beautiful comics and things that I would recommend. You want to go even older, again, go back to things like Neil Adams' run on the X-Men, but you probably won't get that in a trade paperback. Or again, you could go back to the really heavy dark storytelling of Alan Moore with, no, sorry, not Alan Moore. I'm thinking of sorry. Who am I thinking of off the top of my head? So many names are coming to my, go back to the early Daredevil, Frank Miller. Sorry, Frank Miller's Daredevil. There's so many great stories. Again, you want something lighter, find the Infinity Gauntlet. That I'm sure is in trade paperback, things like that. So what else is there? I don't know. The first run of Wolverine comics, or the miniseries for Wolverine, or the original Punisher miniseries. Again, depends on, there's just so much variety. It depends on what exactly you're looking for and how gritty you want it, all that kind of stuff. Let's see, scrolling down. Da, da, da. Puffy says, John's long box, keep up the great work as an electrician. Yeah, again, hopefully I'm not keeping him up too late. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see, scrolling down. Breaker has a good comment here. I found an old Dark Horse movie tie-in comic about Titan AE in my collection. The art style they used doesn't mesh well with Don Bluth's animation. Plus, I only have the third and final issue. I find the same thing when I go through comics of mine. It's like, darn, I only have the third issue. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. See if I can get to the last of these comments. Sound Engravers having a conversation with Elijah. Scrolling down. Have I seen, let's see. Have I seen any Lupin the Third? No. Actually, I'm behind in my anime watching. So I have not got to see any of that. I think, if I remember correctly, that is one of the anime on my list to watch, but no, I haven't gotten there. Scrolling down. Let's see. Puffy says, Herjay sounds like a bear from Bear in the Big Blue House. I don't know why. Do I? The funny thing is, I pretty much always sound like this. I'm fairly, wizened now. We'll just put it that way. I remember all of the '80s. We'll say that. But yeah, I sounded like this for quite some time. I can remember being like in grade 10 and having a girl come up to me in a class that she never met me before. And she says, "Stop doing that voice. That's annoying." And I said, "What voice?" She says, "You're trying to sound like an old man." I'm like, "No, I'm not. That's my voice." And that was when I was in grade 10. So yeah. Scrolling down, let's see. scrolling down. Oh, darn. I gotta jump in my comments again. I'm getting to the bottom of these comments here. John is still here. Great, John. Again, I'm endangering all the other workers on your construction site, but I'm glad that you're still here and that you got to be here in the comments. Let's see. He says they are collecting the first 20 issues of Micronauts. Great Bill Mantillo's script and a beautiful Michael Golden art. I never really got into Micronauts, although I think they're selling ROM now as a collection because Marvel has gotten the license back for ROM. So that's a really, really interesting run of comics if you could get them. You'll probably only, well, even I had some holes in my ROM. And every time I go to a comic shop, I look to fill them up, and they're not easily accessible because, again, it had never been reprinted up until quite recently. So that's another great series. Yeah, very interesting as well. I love the first issues are not the greatest, but when they get into the really the heart of the shapeshifters that are trying to take over the planet, yeah, that's a great story. Much better than Secret Invasion, if you ask me. That was probably the inspiration for Secret Invasion, but I would say the ROM stories did it much better. All right, scrolling down to the last couple of comments. Let's see who's here. Oh, Edmund, how you doing? He says, thanks for all your insights, RJ. I learned a lot about heroism from listening to your videos. Well, thank you very much. I just try to explain things to myself and say, well, maybe someone else will find this interesting. So that's when I do a video. Let's see, scrolling. Oh, now we got the comments coming fast and furious here. Breaker says, sorry, I don't own many Marvel comics, just the first 3 Ultimate Spider-Man issues and another issue where he fights Electro. Jameson gets bruised and Doc Ock's corpse gets stolen. Okay. I actually have bought those Ultima series because they were in the dollar box like 3-4 years ago at my local comic shop, but I never got to read them yet. Let's see, because I missed out on a lot of those, some for the better, if you ask me. Let's see, scrolling down. John says, it is about crowdfunding. He's the owner of Fund My Comic. Must be talking to someone else in the comments. Great. Let's see. I'll see if I can get to these last comments. Brutalized. Okay. So that's what Breaker is saying. He brutalized Jameson. Puffy says, move this comment down so he could see it. Didn't mind clear throat. RJ, have you read? No, I haven't read. No, I'm sorry. Vendetta? Not even familiar with what that is, quite honestly. There's so many things that I'm not familiar with. There's so much media right now that I don't, you'd have to give me more of a context about what it is, whether it's comic, whether it's an anime, whether it's a manga, whether it's a movie, whether it's a television series. So I'm really not familiar with that at all. Let's see. Okay, I think I've gotten to the end of the comments. This is probably my longest stream yet, almost an hour and 40 minutes. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I still got 25 people here. I only talked for 20 minutes about comics and how to make comics, or the appreciation for the making of comics anyways. So as I always do at the end, I just want to let everyone know that the links are in the description for my graphic novels. Crom the Destroyer is the open campaign. We have 13 days left. It is my fantasy graphic novel, Return to Form for low fantasy. You're looking at a picture from the Valiant Heroes in the background. That is Cardinal, one of the new characters for that series. And you can also get the link for the description for the Valiant Heroes in the description. That's where you can get the link for the Valiant Heroes, and you can order that. And if you order the Valiant Heroes, you can also order my first graphic novel, which is Thomas Valiant. So again, click on those links if you find anything that I say about making comics appealing. And if you like some of the art in the background that I'm showing, because I have beautiful artists working on these books. And again, I want to thank everyone for being here for so long. And I'm going to leave you, as I usually do, with my outro, which is the 45-second introduction to Crom the Destroyer. Hopefully, if you haven't got to see Crom the Destroyer, this will give you a good taste of what it's like. So thank you once again, everyone, for being here. I will see you next week. Bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.